सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तन्न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः। The 11th verse of the second chapter. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ashocyanan Vasochastvam Prajñāvādāṃsca bhāsase Gatāsu negatāsumsca Nānuṣocanti panditāः. Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, Tvam anvasochaha. You grieve for asocyan, those who should not be grieved for. Look at the translation. You grieve for those who should not be grieved for. Arjuna expressed his grief for Bhishma, Drona, Katham Bhishmaham Sankhye, Dranch Madhusudana. He Madhusudana, Katham how? Bhishma and Drona. Ishubhi pratiyotsyami. How can I strike them with arrows? Pujarho madhusvarisudana. O enemy, O destroyer of the enemies, they are pujarho. They are worthy of my worship. They are worthy of showering flowers, and you are asking me to strike them with arrows. How can I do that? So Bhishma and Drona are particularly mentioned by Arjuna because Mahanubhavan, they are the great souls, they are my gurus. Bhishma Pitama is my grandfather, grandsire, and he has very fond and sweet memories of both of these old persons. And of course they stand for all the rest of the near and dear ones who are assembled on both sides of both armies of this battlefield. So apparently Arjuna's shoka, or the grief, was caused by the possibility of death of the near and dear ones, which of course seems to be very reasonable to us. When somewhere very close or near one passes away, who will not grieve? Anybody who has some sentiment, some he will grieve. Arjuna also is an emotional being like everybody else. And therefore the prospect of the death of his dear grandfather, of his dear teacher and other dear people would cause grief or sorrow in him seems to be very reasonable. So Arjuna's sorrow or the grief seems to be very reasonable. And the other cause of his grief also we pointed out, that te mriyante man nimittam. Second is, Arjuna thinks that not only they will die, which will cause grief, but I will be the cause of their death. I will be their killer. So Arjuna is a righteous person. And this idea of he being killer of somebody, he would be the agent of performing this violent act, caused also a sense of guilt in him. So guilt arises in us whenever we find that we have done something which is improper in our own perception. We have a perception of ourselves as to how we should be, what our values are, what the attitudes are, how my conduct should be. I have some standard for myself, expectation from myself. And when I cannot live up to my own expectation, then I feel guilty that I did something which is not right for me, I should not have done. In case of Arjuna, he has not yet done it. But he knew that he will become the instrument of killing this near and dear ones. It will be violence, himsa. I would be killer, and that prospect of guilt. And of course, act of killing being violent act also would bring about a lot of papa or sin for him, which will ultimately make him suffer in hell. So all of these made Arjuna. So two causes of grief of Arjuna. One is the death of the near and dear ones, and second is his complex guilt that I will be the instrument in killing them. I will be their killer. So Lord Krishna says Ashocyan. In fact, both of these do not warrant any grief. And whole Bhagavad Gita is, particularly second chapter is going to expound on this. Ashocyan, how come Bhishma and Drona, even though apparently they will be killed and still they do not deserve to be grieved for? Why? That Lord Krishna will explain. And you, who apparently will be the instrument of killing them, also do not deserve to grieve for yourself. Why? And that can be explained this way, that you are grieving for the death or potential death of Bhishma and Drona and others. Lord Krishna will explain right away that there is no such thing as that Atma does not die, that they do not die. You think that Bhishma Pitama will die, Drona will die, other near and dear ones will die. They do not die. There is no death for the self. So if death is the cause of a grief, if you understand the phenomenon of death, you realize that there is no real thing such as death, and therefore it doesn't deserve to be grieved for. So death also ashocham, meaning death also does not deserve to be grieved for, if you understand death exactly what it is. With the kind of notion of death that you have, yes, we have some understanding of what death is. From that standpoint, death would warrant grief. But if you understand death as it really is, then you will realize that it should not cause any grief. And secondly, that you think that you will be the killer. That also is not right, because Atma does not become killer. Atma does not perform any action. There is no doership in the self, and therefore also the killer self also does not warrant grief. So these two causes of grief. Lord Krishna will address these two fundamental problems. And we wish that Lord Krishna had started his teaching with something simpler. But Lord Krishna begins teaching with what we call Paramarthik Satta, or with revealing the absolute truth. Subsequently, he'll tone down and come down to more, mundane level of teaching also. But the style of scriptures is that right away you should address the most prepared student, Uttamadhikari. Lord Krishna addresses Arjuna as his Uttamadhikari, the most prepared student, prepared to understand the absolute reality. If he does, then no further teaching would be required. If he does not understand, then teaching will continue. That means that some preparation is required to understand this, and what that preparation is what Lord Krishna will talk about next. But in case Bhagavad Gita is taken up by someone who is already prepared with what Vedanta calls Antahaka Shuddhi, or purification of mind. If your mind is pure, doesn't have likes and dislikes, doesn't have false complexes, then this teaching will be understood. In which case he will be liberated. He doesn't have to wait too long. For those who are not prepared for the teaching, the second level of teaching. Those who are not prepared for that also, the third level of teaching. So Vedanta addresses three levels of aspirants: Uttamadhikari, Madhyamadhikari, Mandadhikari. Uttamadhikari, the most exalted student; Madhyamadhikari, the middling one; and Mandadhikari is the one who is the least prepared. They are mumukshus, they are aspirants, all right. They are seeking moksha, liberation, there is no question. But the preparedness level is different. So here, Lord Krishna proceeds to tell us these two things, that Bhishma and Drona, meaning that nobody dies. Atma does not die. Then of course the question is, what do you mean by Bhishma and what do you mean by Drona? When you say that Bhishma will die, and Drona will die. What do you mean by Bhishma and Drona? You see, you may recollect an encounter that Adi Shankaracharya himself had with a sweeper. It is said that those days Shankaracharya was in Banaras. The routine was that early morning he would go to the Ganges, have a dip in the Ganges, fill up his kamandalu, the water pot with the water of the Ganges, and return to the temple of Lord Shiva, where he would offer that water as abhisheka. And along with him will be his disciples. So one morning Acharya is returning from his morning ablution, and coming to a temple. As those of you who have visited Banaras know that the streets of Banaras are very narrow. And those days they may have been even narrower. And Acharya Shankara all of a sudden found that this street was blocked by a huge man. It was dawn and there was not enough light, but then ultimately Acharya saw that he was a sweeper, an untouchable. So habitually the words came out from his mouth, apasarpa, apasarpa, gatsa, gatsa, move away, move away. That's how Shankaracharya do today also. I remember many years ago in Sandipani Sadhana I have invited the Acharya from Sringeri, the senior, the one earlier one, Abhinav Vidyati. And he would have cloth like this, like this. Meaning that nobody should come within this, should stay away. They don't touch. Whatever, we won't, deal with that, dwell upon that. But the idea is this is the value. That you do not touch someone who is impure, because again he will have to go back to the Ganges and take a bath. And so habitually he said, gatcha, gatcha, move away, move away. And Acharya got the surprise of his life. When that sweeper confronted him, the sweeper says, Vijavara, you are the most exalted among the Brahmins. I know you are the most exalted among the wise people, and certainly I should obey your command of moving away, no question about it. But before I can follow a command, I just wanted some clarification. Please tell me, what should move away from what? Annamayad annamayam, athva chaitanyameva chaitanyat, dvijavara, duri kartum vanchas kim, bruhi gatsa gachedi bruhi. When you say gatsa, move away. Kim duri kartum vanchasi, what do you want to get away? What do you want to remove? Annamayad annamayam, you mean that this my body, which is a lump of flesh or which is modification of food, and your body, which is another lump of flesh or modification of food, do you want one bundle of food moving away from the other lump of food? Is that what you mean? Athva chaitanyameva chaitanyat. Or you mean that consciousness that I am should move away from consciousness that you are? Is that what you mean? Acharya woke up. He woke up. As soon heard this, he fell flat and offered a long prostration to sweeper. So that shows the true worth. We don't have to judge him by gatcha, move away, because that's all samskaras, upbringing. What Shankaracharya is demonstrated, what he does in response, that he offers a long prostration and says, whoever has this knowledge is my Guru. So, Chandalastu Sato Dvijospi Judostu Guru Ityesha Manishama. Whether he is an untouchable or he is a Brahmin, whoever has this knowledge is my Guru. I don't see any difference in Brahmin and untouchable as long as one has this knowledge, he is my Guru. So similarly also Lord Krishna is also asking Arjuna. When you say Drona, Bhishma, Drona will be killed, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by Bhishma and what do you mean by Drona? Do you mean this body or do you mean the self? Ashocyan says that as self, of course, they do not deserve to be grieved for because self is immortal, as will be said in the next verse itself. It's ever pure. But even Bhishma and Drona's persons also do not deserve to be grieved for because, as says Shankaracharya, Sadvrittatvat Paramatha Rupena cha Nityatvat. See, you should grieve for somebody who is going to suffer. Sometimes after death, a person has to suffer on account of the kind of life that is lived here. But Sadvrittatvat, Bhishma and Drona led a very virtuous life. And therefore, their place in heaven is assured. Therefore, even after death also, they are going to be happy, not unhappy. So there is no need to grieve for them. And of course, if you understand that Bhishma and Drona are nothing but Atma, then Paramatha Rupa, so Vyavaharika Rupa and Paramathika Rupa. Apparently, Bhishma and Drona, both of them have these two forms or two aspects, Vyavaharika and Paramathika. This body, mind, sense complex, which is what we call the personality, which is of course what we think is a person. But Lord Krishna will explain that Bhishma, Drona and everyone, including you and I, all of us are in fact a union of two entities, the person and the personality. This body, mind, sense complex is the personality. And the one who manifests through this complex is person. It's called Purusha, Purnaha, the one that is complete or whole, who is the self of all, who is the consciousness. So everyone is a union of person and personality, Atma and Anatma, consciousness and matter. Now, consciousness requires the vehicle of matter to manifest itself. Therefore, consciousness always manifests as clothed in matter. Just as electricity requires a medium such as a filament bulb in order to manifest itself, or some other appliance to manifest itself. So when you see a bulb glowing, we know that there are two entities involved there. One is the personality, the bulb, the filament, and second is person, the electricity. Electricity is not perceptible to the eyes, but then we know it is there when the bulb is glowing. And so also Atma or consciousness is not perceptible to our senses, but we know it is there when we see this body, mind, sense complex alive. The Arjuna, this body is kept alive not by its own self. The body is not alive, doesn't enjoy that life. Pranasya pranaha. The prana or the body, the life that the body has, is because the pranasya prana, the life of the life, meaning something imparts life to this body, sentiency to this body. Even the eyes and ears and all the organs of perception also perform their functions as though they are live entities. The eyes also function as though they are live entities, and ears and all organs of perception, all organs of action. But again, they are able to do what they are doing on account of the presence of Atma, the consciousness. So Upanishad says, Shrotrasya Shrotram Manasaha Manaha. Shrotra means the faculty of hearing. Hey, there is another Shrotra, there is another entity because of which this faculty is able to hear. There is something that imparts the capacity of hearing to this organ of hearing, capacity to see to the organ of seeing, capacity to speak to the organ of speech, of which the grace is not there. Then these organs of perception could not perceive, organs of action could not act if they did not enjoy the grace of that consciousness. So this is, the teaching starts what called Viveka. Viveka means separation, discrimination between Atma and Anatma. What we are told is that what we think is one entity, namely you and I, in fact are a union of two entities. But what is perceptible is only this matter or the clothing or the costume. And the self of the consciousness which puts on or manifests through the costume is not visible, not perceptible. Therefore we do not take him into account. We only take as real whatever is perceptible to us. And whatever organs of perception reveal to us are merely these gross names and forms, body, mind, sense complex. Even mind also is a matter of inference. Mind also we can't see, but we infer that it is there. But the conscious self is not within the realm of the body, mind, sense perception. But it is there. This is where the scriptures come. There is no way to prove really, There is no way to scientifically prove that there is Atma or consciousness. And therefore you people being what you are, having the Shraddha, the trust, faith and devotion in the words of scriptures and words of the teacher, so you will accept this perhaps. When I make a statement that what is called you is not one entity, it's two entities. What is perceptible, what is experienced, what we call the Vyavaharika or the Vyavaharika Satta, the objective reality is what we perceive, is what we see, is what we think is you. There is something that we do not perceive, which is consciousness. This is what we call Paramadika Satta or absolute reality. So we, each one of us, is a union of the Paramarthika and Vyavaharika, absolute reality and the relative reality. What is relative is objective, perceptible, the body, mind, sense complex, but then it cannot be alive, it cannot be functioning without the grace or the presence of self or the consciousness. Thus there are two entities, Atma and Anatma, self and non-self. So what we perceive, what we interact with is non-self. But the non-self could not be functioning, could not be alive, could not be sentient, could not be doing what it does without the presence of the self or the Atma, consciousness, which is the absolute reality, which is one in many, as Gita will teach us that. Atmas are not many. We think that there are as many self, as many living beings are, so we think. That I am one self, you are other self, and that self are many, that also is not right. Self is one. And absolute. All of these will be, of course, revealed. When Lord Krishna says, Nainam chillanti shastrani, Nainam dahati pavakaha, the weapons cannot destroy this, the fire cannot burn this, the water cannot wet it, the air cannot dry it, meaning that these conventional means of destruction have no these are all at the level of vyavahara, objective, relative reality. They do not in any way affect the Atma's paramarthika, absolute reality. All this will be told. But here Lord Krishna says that none of these deserve to be grieved for, neither Atma nor Anatma. So Bhishma, Drona, if you think that they are just the persons, then also they do not deserve, because they have led a virtuous life. They have lived a full life. And therefore they don't deserve to be grieved for. And of course, as Atma, they do not die, and therefore also they do not deserve to be grieved for. And Bhishma and Drona is just the example, applies to all living beings. And particularly applies to all near and, because other living beings don't matter to us. Somebody's death doesn't always cause us grief. We are not grieved by death as such, we are grieved by death of a particular person who is connected with us. So we said last time, grief arises in us only when we are connected. Meaning that the grief is centered upon the self. When the self gets connected, then there is grief. Arjuna has fought many battles and perhaps been instrumental in killing many people, but he was never grieved so far because he was not connected with those people. Bhishma and Drona and all, they stand for all his near and dear ones. He is connected with them. Or at least today he saw the connection. In the battlefield, all of a sudden he became aware of that connection. Who am I and who they are? I am Esha, Mama Ete, I am theirs, they are mine, they are dear and near ones too. All of a sudden Arjuna became aware of that. If he was not aware of that, nothing would have happened. Even today also, if Arjuna did not become aware of that connection, the emotional connection with Bhishma, Drona and others, then nothing would have happened to him. As we say, just a few months ago, he had fought with the very same army and driven it back in the kingdom of Virat. That time he did not feel anything. But today what happened? All of a sudden, Arjuna became an emotional person. All his attachments and aversions, all of them, he became aware of them. Meaning that he ceased to be a warrior, which is what he's supposed to be. He became an emotional person. He came to battlefield as a warrior, as a Kshatriya, very much aware that as a Kshatriya and warrior, it is my duty to protect the Dharma, and therefore I am going to do that. And Duryodhana stands for adharma, and therefore I am going to confront him and let me see who else is involved there in this battle. Who do I have to take care of? Up to that point, Arjuna had no problem. And with that only in mind, he requested Lord Krishna to place his chariot between the two armies so that he could survey the army. Up to that point, it was all right. But Lord Krishna is very mischievous. So Arjuna says, I want to see the warriors in both the armies. So Lord Krishna deliberately brought the chariot and placed it in a place where Arjuna could clearly see Bhishma and Drona and others. And then said, Uvacha Partha Pashetan Samavetan Kuruniti. Hey Partha, may you see all the Kurus who assembled here. That what Kuru brings about now, not these enemies who assembled here, but then the Kurus who assembled here, and that's how Arjuna became a Kuru. From a warrior, he became a Kuru, means he became an individual person, connected. And that's how now the potential death of Bhishma and Drona now affected him, and so far it did not affect him. It is not that Bhishma and Drona are unknown to him. When he came to battle, he knew very well that he had to fight with these people, did he not? He knew. And still nothing happened to him to that point. Then what happened? A transformation happened in Arjuna. From a Kshatriya, from a warrior who was conscious of his duty, who was determined to perform his duty, he became what? An emotional being, an ordinary, it became Arjuna, related to all these people in a different way. Formerly relationship was, they were enemies and he was on the side of dharma, they were on the side of adharma, that was a relationship. Now, they are dear and near ones. Then the response is different. Meaning that we respond to any situation depending upon how we perceive ourselves. Our response to every situation depends upon how we perceive ourselves. Right now I perceive myself as a teacher and I respond in a certain way. Suppose Swami is to walk in here now, he's not, then my response, my perception would change of myself and then my response will be different, isn't it? Similarly, as long as Arjuna had the perception that I'm a warrior, my role is to protect dharma, so long he was ready to fight. His perception is changed. Whether Lord Krishna played a role in that or not is for us to imagine. But his perception changed. What? I am Arjuna. I am grandson. I am father. I am brother. Therefore, Sanjaya describes that instead of seeing enemies on the other side, he saw Pitrun, Pitamahan, and he saw the uncles and grandparents and maternal uncles, paternal uncles, cousins, friends, etc. That's how grief has come. So in fact, Lord Krishna is to make Arjuna aware of his true nature also. As long as Arjuna remains Arjuna, meaning identified with this body, sense, mind complex, looks upon himself as an individual being, so long he cannot escape grief. Nobody can escape grief as long as he or she looks upon himself or herself as an individual being. You cannot escape grief. Meaning that the grief that we experience is a result of our perception of ourselves for no other reason. Well, Lord Krishna, you ashocha, meaning those who should not be grieved for, Lord Krishna says this, grief is not caused by them. Grief is not caused by somebody else. Grief is caused by your perception of yourself. Because as long as Arjuna had his perception that he is a warrior, there was no grief. The moment his perception changed that he was a grandson, he was uncle, he was cousin, he was father, etc., then the grief overtook him. In ourselves also, the happiness and unhappiness both are caused by our perception of ourselves. So Lord Krishna wants to teach that it is the wrong perception you have of yourself, that's the cause of all the samsara, of the shoka and moha, the grief and delusion. And if your perception changes, you become free from grief and delusion without anything, without any other change, without any other action. All that is necessary is for you to have a correct perception of yourself. Right now you have the false perception of yourself, and therefore your false perception of others also. My perception of others also is determined by my perception of myself. When that changes, everything changes. When I see myself as a person, I see you also as person. When I see myself as consciousness, I see you also as consciousness. then relation, everything changes, all relation changes, response changes also. After all, a wise person also functions in the same world in which we are functioning. How can his response are different? That is because his perception is different. So this is what basically what Vedanta teaches us. Teaches us the right perception. That's all. Basically, right perception of ourselves and thereby the right perception of everything else. Because what I am is what everything is. Therefore, right perception of me will automatically bring about right perception of everything. That's how Vedanta solves the fundamental problem. Ashochan anvasochastvam. You are grieving for those who should not be grieved for. The Prajnavadamsa Vasa is addressed to Arjuna. But why should I not grieve? Then Lord Krishna says in the second line, Gatasum agatasum sya nanushochan panditaha. So now Lord Krishna provides the perception of Pandita. First line is the perception of Arjuna, where he grieves for those who should not be grieved for. Meaning thereby that there is no legitimate reason for grief in our life. How do you say that? Because if your perception changes, then there is no grief. So second line of the verse describes the perception that the wise people are panditaha. So Lord Krishna uses the word panditaha, which Shankaracharya explains as panda asyasti the panditaha. So who is pandita? One who possesses panda. See, word panda is a very misused word these days, because panda reminds us only of those priests when you have Jagannath Puri and stuff like that, and then we, dreaded the very idea of those pandas, those who, been exposed to them. But panda means wisdom. So panda asyasti is pandita. Pandita is the one who has a wisdom. So pandita means a wise person. What is the wisdom? Wisdom is the one who knows things as they are. That's the wisdom. So how does he know? He knows both. He knows the Vyavaharik Satta and also Paramadika Satta. He knows Atma is Atma and Anatma is Anatma. He knows that what I see is not confined to what is perceptible, but there is something that is beyond perception also. That meaning that when I see you, it is not only your body, mind, sense complex, there is something more than that. There is a Paramadika Satta, there is self of the consciousness. So here is the Atma Anatma Viveka, a discrimination between the self and the non-self. He realizes himself that his body, mind, sense complex is Anatma, is non-self, is merely a costume, is a cloth through which the Atma, the consciousness manifests. So let's go Pandita. So wise person, this is only difference, there is not a big difference. Between ourselves and wise person, not a very big difference. What is our perception? We take one where there are two, and it takes two where there are two, that's all. We see one where there are two, and the wise person sees two where there are two. But that makes all the difference. So Atma and Anatma. The wise person knows Atma is Atma and Anatma is Anatma. And none of them deserve to be grieved for if you knew them. This body does not deserve, because body is, as Lord Krishna will explain, Jatasya dhruva mrityuhu. If you look upon death as real for this, then also it belongs to the body, and the death is certain for the one who is born. And therefore, tasmad apariharyate natvam shochitum. Therefore, hey Arjuna, it is not right for you to grieve for something which is inevitable. There are inevitable things in life. There is heat and there is cold. There is success and failure, honor and dishonor, win and loss. What goes up comes down. What is born will die. When two things come together, they will separate also. The realities of life. We are not prepared for the reality. When two come together, we wish that they should always remain together. But then, sarve sanyogaha vyogantaha, the unpleasant or whatever the reality is, that all the associations will result into disassociation. Whatever goes up comes down. What is born will die. And all the accumulation will get exhausted, meaning all the wealth that anybody accumulates, all the treasure, will ultimately get exhausted also. We are not concerned about those things, but the thing is that the one who is born will die. Then wise people are comfortable. So that's called wisdom, when you develop a comfort with the realities of life. That now there is spring, then summer will come. When summer is there, the fall will come. Fall is there, winter will come. And that alone is called even a pragmatic person who has developed comfort with the realities of life. What's the point? Winter will come now, what will happen? And summer will come. They'll complain about everything. So, it's too hot, Swami, too hot. For 3 days, 90 degrees. Come to Ahmedabad, you will find out what 90 degrees. It's like winter, 90 is most comfortable thing, 90 degrees. When you have 105 degrees there, what is 90 degrees? It's all relative. But still, we always complain about everything. About good thing also we complain. Swamiji, but this will go away. Swami, you come, you are very happy, but only for 3 days you come. So a friend of mine used to say, my mother is a very what? So he has some expression, always worries about things. And when she has nothing to worry, she worries, how come I have nothing to worry about? So, it is pragmatic, doesn't require great wisdom also. What requires pragmatism is that developing comfort with the realities of life. Graceful acceptance of the realities of life. For the very simple reason that the realities are created by Ishvara, not created by me. I do not create anything. I confront what is created for me. Is it not so? And if we believe in Ishvara, then we also say that it is Ishvara who creates moment to moment. What I confront is created by Ishvara. And what Ishvara creates must be right. Because it's all knowing. And what comes out through knowledge is always right thing. Ignorance causes wrong things. Knowledge always brings about right things. We are ignorant or partially knowing, and a lot of ignorance is there in us. So it's quite likely that what we do may have, may be wrong. But Ishvara is all it from standpoint of Ishvara. Rather than, so who is wise person? Looks at a situation from the standpoint of Ishvara who has created it. Then everything is in order. Look at the whole globe. Look at the big painting is there. Look at one dot, then you don't see any harmony in there. You see only dots. Or you see one part of the picture, then you see a tiger is attacking a deer. Some picture like that. You see only fear there. If you just see deer. Or you see ferociousness if you only see tiger. See the whole picture, then you see that this is how the nature is. So we see only one part of the picture in our life, that's all we are, and that's how we draw our conclusions. But then, seeing the whole picture, which is what Ishvara sees, taking into account past, present and future, we do not know what consequence the present event will have in future. Even if you are concerned about somebody's death, Swami, he was so young, and then he died. This is definitely something to be grieved for, I guess so. But do you know what would have been the situation had he been alive? Suppose he was alive. Do you know for sure that he would have been a happy person? That if what you desire had happened, is there a guarantee that that would necessarily bring about happiness? Sometimes, life can be very painful also. Therefore, if a person had not died, who knows that he would have been happy? Swamiji, I failed. I did not get what I wanted. But how do you know that if you had gotten it, that it would have been necessarily good for you? Do you know that? You have very limited knowledge. With very limited knowledge that we have, we draw conclusions about what is good and what is bad. But then if you look back in our life in the past, you will recognize that it is good that certain things did not happen to me, which at that time I complained and I was unhappy about, but in the hindsight I realized that thank God it did not happen. Thank God I did not get admission in medical school. Because I don't know what would happen to people, if I had become a doctor. It's good. Maybe something is good for me, something is good for others, after all. But we have no way of determining that what I think is right is necessarily right from a broader perspective, or what I think is wrong is necessarily wrong from a broader perspective. How do we say? With our limited knowledge. We don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone what's going to happen, after 5 years. So event that happens today, what consequences it has after 5 years or 10 years or in the future, we do not know. And therefore, what we call something wrong, we do not know that it's necessarily wrong, taking into account what will happen in future. So it is injustice. How do you know what is justice? No, I don't deserve this. Why should it happen to me? Well, remember that life is a continuity. It began from the time beginningless, and what happens in the present is determined by what was done in the past, and therefore it is the past that determines the present. You don't know what all karma you have performed in the past, and therefore how do you know that what happens in the present is wrong or unfair or unjust? How do you know? And how do you know that it is unfair? How do you know that it may not bring about good consequences in the future? How do you know? So wise people do not draw conclusions based on their limited knowledge. Even their knowledge is limited, because they also have a mind, and therefore the worldly knowledge will be limited. But they realize that because our knowledge is limited, we cannot draw final conclusions based on our limited knowledge. Therefore, they identify the Ishvara, that what Ishvara considers is right. Because whatever is created or whatever is done by Ishvara in His infinite wisdom. So, what is Ishvara? Infinite wisdom. So, what appears every moment is a manifestation of infinite wisdom. Our Swami used to say that the whole universe is nothing but manifestation of knowledge. By knowledge is infinite wisdom. Every moment is infinite wisdom that manifests before us. And we have no business to judge that based on our extremely limited wisdom. That's all a wise person does. He may not know what's going to happen after 5 years. Somebody may know, but it's not necessary. He's not a wise person knows what Ishvara knows. He knows what's going to happen after 10 years. Somebody may know, but it's not necessary. All that is necessary is to understand that what Ishvara does is right. Everything is in order. As our Swami used to say, Everything is in order. If you understand things from all standpoints, not from a narrow standpoint. Nanu shochandi pandita. Therefore the wise people do not see the reason for grief. Because birth and death and all these phenomena, all of them are in keeping with a universal order. And therefore, whatever happens is right. I would have wished that it would have happened otherwise, but then whatever happens is right. It must be the best. Even the person who died must be the best for that person. And hopefully best for those who are left also. Because Ishvara doesn't want to punish anybody, understand? That's also our belief or Shraddha. That not only Ishvara has infinite wisdom, but is infinite. He is Purnaha. He is complete, he is whole. There is no lack, no want. And therefore there is no agenda at all. Ishvara has no agenda for himself. That is called Ishvara. In fact, the bhakta devotee believes that our agenda is Ishvara's agenda. Meaning Ishvara's agenda is what is good for me. Although my perception of what is good for me may be different from his perception. That's okay. Like a child has a perception of what is good for him, and then he wants second candy, third candy, fifth candy. That is his perception. And mother has another perception, and therefore she may not give it to the child. Child may think that mother is very cruel or unfair to me, but maybe the child will recognize when he grows up. Many people tell us, Swamiji, my grandfather was very strict and he made us wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and then chant this and chant that. And we just hated that. But today I realize that because of how many verses do I know, I'm so familiar with Bhagavad Gita, and then all of that has brought me here. So what was not clear at that time may become clear in hindsight. Meaning that a wise person always gives benefit of doubt to Ishvara. And therefore does not see any reason to grieve. And for us also, tasmad pariharyarthe natvam shochitum anasi. Lord Krishna will say subsequently that what is inevitable. There is no point in grieving about what is inevitable, what cannot be avoided, what you cannot change. Even if you grieve, so what? Oh Swamiji, now the day will be over, night will come, what will I do? It will come. So suppose you grieve, is it going to change something? Suppose we grieve and you do all kinds of things, will it change anything? If it helps that person who has passed away, then you can cry as much as you want, but that's not going to happen. We grieve because somebody is sick, but then also no point in grieving. You do something that is to be done. Because grief, in fact, makes us inactive, makes us disabled, handicapped. We can't respond to a situation. All this sounds very cruel. When the Vedantins talk like this, sounds very cruel, but that's only pragmatic. So in no way shoka or grief has any reason at all. Either we look at simply the worldly view, there is no question of grief when we take the absolute view, but even for the worldly view also, there is no justifiable reason for grief. This is all very intellectual. What is emotional is a different matter. Arjuna is emotional. Lord Krishna is only talking to his intellect. So it's not going to work too well. Because what we all understand right now, and it all makes sense to us, is to our intellect. But we have two faculties. One is buddhi, other is manaha. One is the intellect, the thinking, knowing, understanding faculty. Other is the feeling and responding, an impulsive faculty. It has its own intelligence. Buddhi has one kind of intelligence and mind is another kind. It's called emotional intelligence. So there's another expression now. Emotional intelligence. There are different kinds of quotients nowadays they talk in the management. The IQ is one thing. But then there is the emotional quotient, there is spiritual quotient, all kinds of quotients they talk about. They realize that intellectual is not enough. Intellect doesn't do anything really. Our intellect or buddhi does not do any vyavahara. It is the mind that does all the vyavahara. His mind that is in contact with the world. It gets the data. It interprets data before it gives to the intellect. So this person, intellect doesn't have the right data also because already influenced by the mind by the time it goes to there. Watch out, mind says, Mind itself already concludes good, favorable, unfavorable, good, bad, right, wrong. Then intellect makes a decision. But mind has already colored things. So that Lord Krishna will address subsequently. That the mind also needs to be addressed and mind needs to be transformed. Our emotional faculty also needs to be transformed. That is recognized by Lord Krishna, meaning for the people who are not emotionally mature. In the words of Pujya Swamiji, emotionally mature or emotionally immature. So emotional immaturity that doesn't allow you to assimilate this teaching. Even when you understand it, as long as we are in the class, we understand it. The moment you walk out and stand in that line for the food, etc., then, different people come out. Then the emotional people come out. That you and I, all of us, So that is where what we call emotional maturity is required, where the alignment between the wisdom and the impulses or emotions. So that's a big work to be done, which Lord Krishna will talk about. That's called Karma Yoga. So therefore, please do not complain about what we are saying right now, because the one who complains is an emotional being and he will find this to be very cruel. This way of talking. I mean, Swami, the person is dying and you say there is no cause of grief. So this kind of expression will naturally come out on the part of that emotional faculty, which we respect. Say, right now, therefore, we are addressing the intellectual faculty. And then Bhagavad Gita also will teach us how to bring an alignment, the understanding of intellect, how to assimilate that understanding by bringing about a transformation in our emotional faculty, in our reacting faculty. It's called yoga. That process is called yoga. This is Brahma Vidya and Yoga Shastra. Two things are taught. Brahma Vidya, the knowledge of Brahman, the knowledge of absolute reality, which is what Lord Krishna is teaching. And subsequently we'll talk about Yoga Shastra, or what should be done to bring an alignment, our emotional being with our intellectual being. So right now don't bring emotions in between, right now. I'm sure in satsang all questions will be there, but then, and that's okay. But the thing is, right now here, Lord is talking in a very objective manner, or Swami would call objective view. What is objective? Seeing things as they are. Atma and Anatma, these two entities are there, seeing them as they are. Gatasun, agatasumsya, nanushochandi panditaha. Panditaha, the wise people, na anushochandi, they do not grieve. Shochandi, anushochandi. Anu means in keeping with. So we grieve in keeping with what happens. Something happens and we respond in keeping with that. So usually our response of shoka, for example, grief, is in keeping with something that has happened or not happened also. What does not happen also can cause grief, and what happens also can cause grief. Many people who have died also can cause grief. People who have not died also can cause grief. Isn't it so? In fact, more grief. So two causes of grief can be there. Those who are departed and those who are not departed. Both of them can cause us grief. So, Panditaha nanu shochanti, the wise people, they do not grieve for those who have departed and for those who are not departed. But Swamiji, that sounds like very insensitive fellows. Wise people are so insensitive that nothing happens to them. That a person passes away and nothing touches him. And a live person is in front of him, nothing touches him. So that when we were once talking about this Sthita Prajna, that will come later, a man of abiding wisdom, Dukkheshu anudvignamanaha sukheshu vigataspruha. Those who are not perturbed in the painful situations or not elated in the pleasant situations. A Western person was in the audience, and as soon as the talk was over, right away that person came. So, does it mean the person doesn't have any feeling at all? Is it description of insensitive person? Yes, it could be. Insensitive person also doesn't feel grief. But we are not an insensitive person. We are talking about somebody who is sensitive to more than what we are sensitive to. That is sensitive to something more than what is visible to others. Sensitive to Atma, not only Anatma. So Anatma does not deserve to be grieved for, nor Atma. So those who are departed, because it's a reality of life. The departure is certain for the one who has arrived. And those who are here are going to depart someday. That also is a reality. So Ramana Maharshi would say, that you should meditate upon your own death. Which is what he did. When he started meditating, all of a sudden, he didn't start. It just happened. He just felt he was dying. And from there, his wisdom just manifested. But he used to say, that you see yourself as being carried away to the cremation ground and the body is being cremated. But you are a witness, you realize that what is being cremated is not you. Anyway, that was his idea of asking us to meditate upon our own death. But those who are departed and those who are not departed, both ways. If you look upon departed as the people who are departed, then also they know that those who arrive have to depart, and therefore it doesn't deserve to be grieved for. And that Atma has never arrived, therefore does not depart. The Atma also doesn't deserve to be grieved for. So wise people have the right perception. As we said, it's a false perception that causes grief, and they are called wise people with the right perception. Nanu shochanti panditaha. For those who are departed, not that they are insensitive, not that they are not grieving, that they are determined not to grieve. Understand that we do not grieve, although the expression is Arjuna was grieving. Although it will be grief, we do not grieve, the grief takes over us. We don't invite grief, nobody wants to invite. We cannot deliberately become grieved or sad. We cannot deliberately become sad. If our Swamiji was, he would invite you, come on, become sad. Become sad. Come on, start crying, become sad. You cannot deliberately become sad. Sadness happens in spite of ourselves. We cannot deliberately become angry. Anger happens. All impulses happen. We don't become angry. We don't become greedy. We don't become lustful. We don't become sad. we don't become sorrowful. All of these things happen to us. They catch hold of us. So it is not that they don't grieve, because nobody grieves, but the grief takes hold of us. What it means is that grief does not take hold of the wise person, people. That's all it means. So we'll take a break here for a short time and we'll continue. How come it does not take hold of them? And how come it takes hold of us? We'll continue our discussion.